The gravy congealed on my plate while the silence stretched. 7 people sat around that table, and not one of them could look at me. My sister's face had gone from its usual warm brown to something ashen, something I'd only ever seen on people sitting across from me in interview rooms when they realized I had the file open. My mother's fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. My father's hand was flat on the table like he was bracing for an earthquake. And my niece, sweet Zuri, 7 years old with her braids tied up in little gold ribbons, just kept eating her mashed potatoes like she hadn't detonated a bomb in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. "Mommy, why do you call Auntie Rachel the piggybank lady when she's not here?" That's what she said. Casual. The way kids ask why the sky is blue. No malice. No agenda. Just a child repeating what she'd absorbed from the air of her own household. The way children absorb everything we think we're hiding from them. I need to take you back. Not to that table, not yet. I need to take you back far enough that you understand who I was before that moment, what I'd built, what I'd given, and exactly how much of my own life I handed to people who saw me as a function rather than a person. Because what happened after Zuri's question wasn't an explosion. It was something quieter and far more devastating. It was the moment a professional fraud investigator finally turned her training on her own blood. And what I found was worse than anything I've ever uncovered in 23 years of catching liars for a living. My name is Rachel Okonkwo. I'm 51 years old. I live in Decatur, Georgia, about 15 minutes east of downtown Atlanta, in a 3-bedroom bungalow with hardwood floors that creak in the hallway, and a sunroom that catches the morning light so clean you'd think someone staged it. I've lived alone in this house for 9 years. Before that, I lived alone in a condo in Midtown. Before that, a studio apartment in East Point while I was finishing my master's. I've been alone a long time. Not lonely. There's a difference, and I used to believe I knew what it was. I'm a senior insurance fraud investigator, have been for over 2 decades. I work for one of the largest insurance carriers in the Southeast, and my specialty is medical disability fraud. I am very, very good at my job. My clearance rate is the highest in my division. My case files are used in training seminars. When something doesn't add up, when the numbers whisper one thing and the story tells another, I find the seam. I pull the thread. I follow the money until it confesses. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because the irony of what happened to me is so precise it could cut glass. I catch liars. That is what I do, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. I sit across from people who have constructed elaborate fictions to extract money from systems designed to help the truly vulnerable, and I dismantle those fictions piece by piece until the truth is sitting on the table between us, naked and undeniable. And the whole time I was doing this, the whole time I was sharpening this skill, perfecting this instinct, my own family was running the longest, most patient, most intimate con I have ever encountered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the woman I was before the word piggy bank entered my vocabulary. I grew up in College Park, south of Atlanta. My parents, Aid and Comfort Okonkwo, came from Nigeria in 1978. My father worked maintenance at Hartsfield Airport. My mother cleaned houses in Buckhead, which is a detail that will matter later in a way that turns my stomach even now. I was the oldest by 4 years. Delia, my sister, was the baby. The pretty one, the charming one. The one who could talk her way out of a burning building and convince the fire department to apologize for the inconvenience. I was the steady one, the reliable one. The one who got scholarships not because I was brilliant, but because I was relentless. I worked my way through Georgia State. I worked my way through my master's program. I got my certifications, passed my exams, built my career one case file at a time while my sister floated between ambitions, cosmetology, real estate, event planning, each one funded by someone else's faith in her potential. I don't say this with bitterness. Not yet. At the time, I loved being the foundation. I loved being the person who could be called. When my mother needed her gallbladder surgery in 2003, and the insurance didn't cover the full amount, I wrote a check for $4,200 without hesitation. When my father's car threw a rod on I-85 and he needed transportation to keep his airport job, I co-signed a loan and made the first 3 payments myself. When Delia needed first and last month's rent for her apartment in East Atlanta because she'd left her boyfriend and had nowhere to go, I drove there at 11 at night with an envelope of cash and a box of her favorite cereal because I remembered she hadn't eaten. These aren't complaints. These are the bricks I laid. I want you to see them clearly, each one, because later you'll see how the building I constructed with those bricks was never mine. I was just the labor. My weekday mornings started at 5:15. I'd stand in my kitchen in Decatur with the overhead light making the countertops glow, and I'd brew a pot of Ethiopian yirgacheffe, the good stuff, the one indulgence I never cut from my budget. And I'd sit with my case files spread out on the table and do 30 minutes of review before my commute. I liked the silence of that hour. The neighborhood still asleep. The coffee steam curling up past the window where I could see my neighbor's magnolia tree just standing there, patient as a cathedral. My hands wrapped around that mug, my mind already sharpening. I was thorough. At work, I was known for my thoroughness. My desk had a reputation. Other investigators would bring me cases they were stuck on because I could spot the inconsistency in a claimant's story that everyone else had missed. A doctor's signature that appeared on 2 forms dated the same day at clinics 40 miles apart. A workplace injury that supposedly happened during a shift that time records showed the claimant never worked. I found these things because I believed in patterns. I believed that deception always left fingerprints if you were patient enough to dust for them. I brought this same diligence to my family. I tracked my spending carefully. Always had. Not in a miserly way, but in an organized way. I kept records, receipts, bank statements. I filed everything. This was just who I was. The woman who documented. The woman who kept the paper trail clean. It was a professional habit that had become personal, and I never imagined it would become a weapon. Let me tell you about 2009, because that's the year that changed the architecture of my body. And though I didn't understand it at the time, the architecture of my family's expectations. I was 34. I'd been dating a man named Terrence for about a year. Good man, electrical engineer, patient. He wanted children, and for the first time in my adult life, so did I. We weren't engaged yet, but we'd started talking about it. The way serious people talk, not in fantasies, but in logistics. School districts, savings projections, whether we'd want the kid to learn Igbo. In March of that year, I started having abdominal pain that I attributed to stress. By April, the pain had teeth. By May, I was in Emory University Hospital having an emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured my fallopian tube. The damage was extensive. The surgeon did what he could, and what he could do was save my life by taking my uterus. I woke up in a hospital room with fluorescent light pressing down on me like a flat hand, and my mother sitting in the corner chair reading a worn Bible, and Terrence standing by the window looking at me with an expression I would later understand was the beginning of leaving. He tried. I'll give him that. He stayed another 14 months, but the future we'd sketched in those careful, logical conversations had been erased. And some people can't rebuild a house once the floor plan's been thrown away. Here's what I need you to understand. I grieved. I grieved deeply, privately, in the way of someone who has been trained to process information rather than emotion. I didn't fall apart publicly. I went back to work after 6 weeks. I threw myself into cases with a focus that my supervisor called impressive and that I knew was survival. I cooked elaborate meals for one. I cleaned my house until the floors shone. I sat in my car in parking lots sometimes and cried with the engine running and the heat blasting because the warmth felt like being held, and I didn't have anyone to hold me, and I'd accepted that I probably never would. And somewhere in that grief, something calcified. A belief. A quiet one, almost invisible, but load-bearing. The belief was this: if I cannot be a mother, I can still be essential. I can still be the person who holds things together. I can still be needed. And if my family needs me, if Delia needs me, if my parents need me, then my life has structure. My life has purpose. My childlessness is not an absence. It is a resource. More money, more time, more bandwidth, more of myself to give. I can see now how dangerous that belief was, how it turned my wound into a door that anyone could walk through. But at the time, it felt like salvation. The giving accelerated after that. 2011. Delia calls me on a Tuesday evening. I'm in my kitchen, case files on the table, coffee going cold because I'd gotten absorbed in a claimant's social media history that contradicted his claim of immobility. Delia's voice is doing that thing it does, trembling at the edges like a leaf in wind. She tells me she's met someone. Marcus. He's wonderful. He wants to marry her. But she wants a real wedding, Rachel. She wants the dress and the venue and the flowers. She wants it in Savannah because she went there once for a bachelorette party and fell in love with those squares and the moss hanging from the oak trees. My father calls the next day. His voice is different from Delia's. His is heavy, reluctant. The voice of a man performing the distaste of asking for money. He says his disability check barely covers his own expenses. He says he wishes he could help Delia, but his back, Rachel, my back is bad. He can't work the way he used to. The checks from the government are modest. Could I help with the wedding? He'd pay me back when he could. $38,000. That's what Delia's destination wedding in Savannah cost. I know the number because I paid every invoice directly. The venue at a historic inn, $11,000. Catering for 120 guests, $8,500. Delia's dress, alterations, veil, and shoes, $4,200. Flowers. She wanted peonies and garden roses in February, which meant importing them, $3,800. Photography and videography, $3,000. DJ, $1,500. Wedding coordinator, $2,500. Hair and makeup for the bridal party, $1,800. And the miscellaneous charges, shuttle buses, welcome bags, the rehearsal dinner she added 3 weeks before the event, that ate up the remaining $3,700. I paid for all of it. $38,000 drained from a savings account I'd been building since my 20s. I remember the transaction that brought me below 6 figures for the first time in years. I remember looking at the balance and feeling a hollowness under my ribs that I told myself was pride, not loss. My sister was getting married. I was making it happen. I was essential. At the wedding, I sat at a table near the back, not the head table. Delia said the head table was for the bridal party, and I wasn't technically a bridesmaid. She'd said she wanted to keep it to her closest friends, which was a sentence I absorbed without flinching at the time. My mother gave a toast. She thanked God. She thanked Marcus's family. She thanked the pastor. She thanked the caterer by name. She did not mention who paid for any of it. I clapped with everyone else. The champagne was good. I'd selected it myself. 2013. Delia and Marcus want to buy a house. They've found one in Buckhead, which, if you know Atlanta, you know is not a modest aspiration. Buckhead is old money and new money, and the kind of money that wears athleisure to brunch because it doesn't need to prove anything. The house is listed at $480,000, but they negotiate it down to $450,000. Delia calls me, not crying this time, frustrated. The banks, Rachel. The banks are discriminating against them. She and Marcus have been denied twice. She uses that word, discriminating, and I feel it land in my chest the way it's designed to, because we both know what it means to be Black in America and to be told your money isn't good enough. She asks me to co-sign. Just the co-sign, Rachel. They'll make every payment. I'll never even think about it. It's just a formality. The bank needs someone with a stronger credit profile. And my credit is good, but yours is excellent. $120,000. That's what I co-signed for. That's what I attached my name and my creditworthiness to. Because my sister said the word discrimination, and I couldn't be the person who didn't help. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. Why didn't you see it? You're a fraud investigator. You catch liars for a living. How did you miss this? And the answer is the same answer that every victim of family fraud gives when they finally see the scope of it. Because love is the most effective cover story ever invented. Because the person running the con on you isn't a stranger in a police lineup. They're the one who knows your maiden name, your blood type, your surgery scar, and the exact tone of voice that makes you feel like a bad sister for hesitating. Because I could spot a stranger lying about a back injury from across a conference table, but I couldn't hear my own sister lying about why she needed money, because I had decided, on a level deeper than logic, that my family was the one place I didn't have to be an investigator. My family was the one place I could just be Rachel. Generous, reliable, needed Rachel. I was a fool. But I was a fool for the most human reason in the world, and I won't apologize for that, even as I catalog the cost. 2015. Delia discovers a new passion. She's going to be a doula, birthing coach. She's found a certification program, very comprehensive, very legitimate, and the total cost, including materials and supervised practice hours, is $28,000. I'm not going to draw this one out. You already know what happened. The $28,000 did not go to any doula certification program. There was no certification. There was a Range Rover. A 2014 Range Rover Sport, black with tan leather interior, which Delia drove to my house one Sunday afternoon to show me, telling me she'd gotten an incredible deal through Marcus's connection at a dealership, and that she was leasing it for practically nothing. I looked at that car in my driveway. I looked at the leather seats through the window. I think some part of me knew. Some deep, investigator-trained part of my brain registered the timing. The $28,000 for the program, the sudden appearance of a luxury vehicle, the story about the lease deal that I couldn't verify. But I pushed it down. I pushed it down the way you push down the thing that will cost you everything if you let it surface. I told myself Delia was many things, but she wouldn't steal from me. She wouldn't look me in the face and fabricate an entire career aspiration to extract money for a car. I told myself that, and I believed it, because I needed to. The years between 2015 and 2023 aren't a blur exactly. They're more like a river that keeps moving and you stop noticing the current because you're in it. The requests continued. The amounts varied. Some were small. 200 here for Zuri's school supplies, 500 there for an unexpected car repair, and some were larger, and each one came wrapped in urgency and family obligation, and the unspoken understanding that Rachel would handle it, because Rachel always handled it. But there were other things happening in those years that I didn't recognize as part of the pattern until much later. Small things. The way the family group chat would go silent when I asked a question but light up when I wasn't included. Then I discovered I was being excluded from a separate group chat entirely, one for planning holidays, sharing news, coordinating visits. I was only added to threads when money was involved. This wasn't speculation. I saw it on Delia's phone once when she left it unlocked on the kitchen counter at my parents' house. A group chat called Okonkwo Fam, with my mother, my father, Delia, and Marcus. Scrolling back, I could see messages about Easter brunch, about Zuri's school play, about a cousin's visit from Houston. None of these events had been mentioned to me. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking, but only slightly, and I pressed them flat against the countertop until they stopped. I should tell you about my mother. About what she was doing while Delia was making direct withdrawals from my life. My mother, Comfort, is a woman who raised 2 daughters while cleaning the houses of wealthy white families in Buckhead. She has calloused hands and a strong jaw and a faith in God that is both genuine and weaponized. She has been telling the extended family, cousins in Nigeria, aunts in Houston, uncles in London, a version of my life story that I didn't author and didn't know existed until 2019, when my cousin Ades visited from Lagos. Ades and I were sitting on my back porch drinking iced tea. and she said something that made the glass go still against my lip. She said, "Rachel, your mother told us you know you owe the family for raising you when you almost died." I didn't almost die. I was a healthy baby. I was a healthy child. I had childhood asthma that was managed with an inhaler and resolved by my teens. I did not almost die. But my mother had constructed a narrative in which my birth was a crisis, my survival was a debt, and my life since then was a repayment plan. She had told the extended family that Rachel knows this. Rachel agrees. Rachel gives because she owes, and the family accepts because they sacrificed. I set the iced tea down. The condensation ring on the wooden table spread slowly outward like something opening. I thanked Adais for telling me. She looked at me with an expression that might have been pity or might have been recognition. The look of someone who's seen a structure that was supposed to be solid and noticed the crack running through it. I still didn't act. Not yet. I was still 2 years away from the Thanksgiving that would change everything. I was still carrying the belief that maybe it wasn't as coordinated as it looked. Maybe my mother was exaggerating to relatives the way immigrant parents sometimes do. Maybe Delia was just irresponsible, not predatory. Maybe I was seeing patterns where there were only coincidences, the way I sometimes did at work when a case was clean, but my instincts kept prickling. I wanted to believe the best version of the story. I wanted to believe I was loved, not managed. And then came Thanksgiving 2023. Let me set the scene because every detail matters. My parents' house in College Park. The dining room that my mother keeps immaculate with a tablecloth she irons every holiday, white with embroidered edges she brought from Nigeria. The turkey that my father always carves even though his grip isn't what it used to be. Or what he claims it isn't, which is a distinction that will matter soon. The china that my mother only uses for holidays. The house smells like jollof rice and cornbread and sweet potato pie, and I'm wearing a burgundy blouse I bought for the occasion because I still showed up trying. I always showed up trying. Delia is across the table in a cream cashmere sweater that retails for about $600. And I know this because I have a colleague whose wife owns the boutique on West Paces Ferry, where Delia shops. Delia's nails are done. Her hair is freshly installed. Marcus is beside her in a polo shirt, his plate already loaded for seconds. My parents are at the heads of the table. Zuri is between Delia and me, in a little purple dress with her braids in gold ribbons, and she is the only person at this table who will tell the truth today. She looks up at Delia, mashed potatoes on her fork, and she says it the way children say everything, as a genuine question, without understanding the weight of the words. "Mommy, why do you call Auntie Rachel the piggybank lady when she's not here?" The silence wasn't just silence. It was the sound of 6 adults realizing that a child had just broadcasted the private frequency. Delia's fork hit the edge of her plate with a small porcelain click. My mother's hand went to her chest. Not in shock, I realize now, but in the reflex of a woman calculating damage control. My father looked at his plate. Marcus looked at Delia. And Delia looked at me with an expression that was half panic and half performance, her eyes widening in that way that could be either genuine surprise or rehearsed innocence. "Baby, that's not—" Delia started. But Zuri wasn't done. Children aren't done when adults want them to be. Zuri was 7, and 7-year-olds live in a world where information is simply information, where there's no reason not to share it, where the adult architecture of secrecy and strategy hasn't been installed yet. "And Mommy said you can't have babies so you don't need your money anyway." Zuri tugged my sleeve. She was looking up at me with those clear, honest eyes. "She said that's why God made you rich, to help us." I want you to understand what that sentence did to my body. Not to my feelings, to my body. My hands went cold, not metaphorically cold. The blood left them. My fingers wrapped around my fork went numb. My throat closed the way it does when you swallow wrong. But I hadn't swallowed anything. My chest compressed. One breath in, held, because the breath out would carry sound, and I didn't trust what sound would come. That's why God made you rich. To help us. My childlessness, my hysterectomy, my surgery, my loss, repackaged by my sister as a divine business arrangement. As if God had looked at Rachel Okonkwo at 34 years old, bleeding on an operating table, losing her uterus and her future children and eventually her partner, and thought, good. Now she'll have more money for Delia. The adults at the table scrambled. My mother said something about how children say the funniest things. Delia laughed too loudly and changed the subject to dessert. My father cleared his throat and said something about football. Marcus got up to refill his drink. The machine of denial cranked into motion, smooth and practiced, and within 2 minutes the table was talking about something else, and I was sitting there with cold hands and a numb face and congealing gravy, and the understanding, finally, irreversibly, that I was not a member of this family. I was an asset. I excused myself. I said I needed air. I walked out the front door into the November cold, Atlanta cold, which isn't brutal but was enough to make my arms prickle under the burgundy blouse. I got into my car in the driveway. I started the engine. I turned the heat up as far as it would go, and I sat there. Engine running, heat blasting, the dashboard glowing in the dusk. I whispered it, out loud, to no one, to myself, to the version of me that had known for years but refused to articulate it. I investigate liars for a living. I catch them every single day, and I let my own blood run the longest con of my life. The words hung in the heated air of my car, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not breaking, not shattering. Something more structural than that, like a foundation settling after an earthquake, finding its new position. The old architecture of belief, that I was loved, that the giving was reciprocal, that family was the one place I didn't need to investigate, that architecture was done. It wasn't falling. It had already fallen. I was just now hearing the sound. I sat in that car for 22 minutes. I know because the clock on my dashboard was the first thing I focused my eyes on when the numbness started to recede, and the last thing I checked before I put the car in reverse and drove home. I didn't go back inside to say goodbye. Delia texted me that night. Sorry about Z, kids say crazy things LOL. Anyway, her school assessment is coming up and I need to talk to you about costs. Call me tomorrow? $55,000. That was the number she would eventually ask for. $55,000 for Zuri's special needs education assessment at a school that, when I later checked, had no record of any evaluation being recommended, scheduled, or even discussed. But she didn't know I was going to check. She didn't know that the piggybank lady had just become an investigator again. And this time, the subject of the investigation was home. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I went to work early. 5 a.m. The office was dark except for the security lights in the hallway. I sat at my desk with my coffee and I did something I had never done before. I opened a new case file. I didn't label it with a claim number or an insured's name. I just labeled it with a date. November 23, 2023. The date my niece opened my eyes. And then I started doing what I do. I started pulling the thread. First, I went through my own financial records, every bank statement from 2009 forward, every check written, every transfer made, every cashier's check purchased. I organized them chronologically, and then I organized them by recipient, and then I totaled them. The number, and I'm going to tell you this number, and I want you to hold it in your mind the way I held it in mine, sitting at my desk in the blue light of the monitor at 5 in the morning. The number was $297,412. $297,412, given over 14 years, to my family, for emergencies that weren't emergencies, for programs that didn't exist, for a wedding I wasn't honored at, for a house I co-signed for in a neighborhood my mother used to clean. I sat with that number. I let it sit in my chest. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying in parking lots and cars and on the bathroom floor after the hysterectomy and in the silence of a house that no child would ever fill. I was past crying. What I felt was something colder and more useful. I felt the same feeling I get when a fraud case clicks into focus, when the scattered data points suddenly arrange themselves into a constellation and I can see the shape of the lie. But the ledger, devastating as it was only the surface. It told me how much I'd given. It didn't tell me the full scope of what had been taken. For that, I needed to investigate deeper. And I had a decision to make about how to do it. I could have confronted Delia directly, driven to her house in Buckhead, the house I'd co-signed for, and laid the bank statements on her imported marble counter and demanded answers. That's what a normal person would have done, an angry sister, a betrayed daughter. But I am not a normal person in this specific capacity. I am a fraud investigator with 23 years of experience, and I know that confronting a subject before you have the complete picture is the single most common mistake an investigator can make. Confrontation without comprehensive evidence gives the subject time to destroy records, coordinate stories, and construct new narratives. I had seen too many cases collapse because an investigator acted on emotion before the file was complete. I was not going to make that mistake. Not with these stakes. So I hired a private investigator. A woman named Cheryl Voss, out of Marietta. I'd worked with her on insurance cases. She was thorough, discreet, and she had a particular talent for financial forensics, following money through the layers of misdirection that people build when they have something to hide. I gave Cheryl 2 objectives. First, verify or disprove every financial claim my family had made to justify the money they'd received from me. The disability, the doula program, the school assessment. Every story attached to every dollar. Second, determine if there were patterns of financial exploitation I hadn't yet identified. Cheryl called me 12 days later. Her voice on the phone had that particular flatness that professionals use when they're about to deliver findings they know will cause damage. She said, "Rachel, we need to meet. Not on the phone." We met at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland. She had a manila folder. And I should tell you about this folder, because it started that day as a tool, and it would become something else entirely before this story was over. It was the same kind of manila folder I'd used in hundreds of investigations. Standard, unassuming, the kind of folder that changes lives. Cheryl opened it and showed me 3 things. First, Delia had been collecting emergency loans from 3 other family members. My cousin Adaisy's mother in Houston, my uncle Amika in London, and a church friend of my mother's in Stone Mountain, using my name as fake collateral. She'd told each of them that Rachel would guarantee the repayment, that Rachel was good for it, that Rachel had so much money she'd barely notice. The amounts were $12,000, $8,000, and $15,000. $35,000 borrowed against my name and reputation without my knowledge. I held the documentation, bank transfer receipts, text message screenshots where Delia explicitly invoked my name, my income, my willingness to cover any shortfall. My name, typed out by my sister's thumbs on a phone I'd paid the monthly bill for until 2 years ago, used as a promissory note in a scheme I didn't know existed. Second, the doula certification. Cheryl had found no evidence of any enrollment in any certified doula program in the state of Georgia or anywhere else. The $28,000 I'd given Delia in 2015 corresponded exactly with the down payment and first 6 months of financing on a 2014 Range Rover Sport registered to Delia Okonkwo Williams. I already suspected this one. But suspecting and confirming are different things. Suspecting lets you keep the door cracked. Confirming slams it shut. And third, and this is the one that took the floor out from under me, my father. Cheryl had discovered through public records requests and cross-referencing federal databases she had legal access to through her professional licensing that my father, Aide Okonkwo, had been collecting Social Security disability insurance benefits for 12 years based on a claimed injury to his lumbar spine that supposedly prevented him from working. The claim had been filed in 2011. The monthly benefit was approximately $2,200. Over 12 years, this amounted to over $316,000 in federal disability payments. Here's why this matters beyond the money. My father didn't have a debilitating back injury. Cheryl had obtained surveillance documentation, legally through the kind of records that become available when you know where to look, showing my father performing physical activities entirely inconsistent with his claimed disability. Lifting furniture at a church event, playing with Zuri in the backyard, helping Marcus move a refrigerator into the Buckhead house. All time-stamped, all dated, all during periods when he was supposedly unable to work. And the money from those disability checks? It didn't stay in my father's account. Cheryl traced regular transfers, monthly, like clockwork, from my father's account to Delia's. $2,000 a month, sometimes more. The disability money that was supposed to compensate for an injury that didn't exist was being funneled to my sister. Had been for over a decade. Do you understand what I'm telling you? My father committed federal disability fraud. He filed false claims. He collected taxpayer money. And he routed that money to Delia. My mother knew. The transfers came from a joint account she had access to. They all knew. It was a system. They had a system. I sat in that coffee shop with the manila folder open in front of me, and my colleague, because Cheryl was also a colleague in the broader sense, someone who understood fraud investigation, looked at me across the table and said, "Rachel, your father's been collecting checks based on a disability that doesn't exist, and the money's been going straight to your sister for years." I closed the folder. I pressed my palms flat on it. I felt the paper under my hands, the slight texture of the manila, the weight of the documents inside. And I realized something that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't irresponsibility. This wasn't Delia being bad with money or my father being too proud to work. This was fraud. Coordinated, sustained, deliberate fraud. They had a system for extracting money from me, and they had a parallel system for extracting money from the federal government, and both systems fed the same recipient. My sister. My baby sister. The one I drove to school. The one I helped with homework. The one whose wedding I paid for, and whose house I co-signed, and whose fictional career I funded, and whose luxury car I accidentally financed. The shift that happened in my understanding wasn't from they're ungrateful to they're selfish. It was from they're selfish to they're strategic. And that shift, that realization that the exploitation wasn't impulsive but engineered, generated something in me that went beyond anger. It was the cold, clarifying focus I feel at work when a case goes from circumstantial to airtight. I knew what I had to do. I'd known since I sat in my car in the driveway on Thanksgiving, engine running, heat blasting. But now I had the evidence. Now I had the complete file. Now I could act not from emotion, but from proof. But first, I needed to talk to someone, and there was only one person I trusted. Her name is Gloria Mensah. She'd been my closest friend since we met at a professional development seminar in 2008. She's a forensic accountant for the state of Georgia, which means she spends her days following money through mazes that other people built to hide it. We understood each other at a molecular level. We both lived in the space between numbers and truth. I called Gloria on a Saturday morning. She answered on the second ring because Gloria always answers on the second ring, not the first, which would seem eager, and not the third, which would seem reluctant. Everything about Gloria is calibrated, and I mean that as the highest compliment. I said, "I need to come over." She said, "I'll make tea." I drove to Gloria's house in Kirkwood. She has a small bungalow, similar to mine, with a front porch where she keeps 2 rocking chairs that she bought at an estate sale in Eatonton. She was sitting on the porch when I pulled up, 2 mugs steaming on the railing, wearing her weekend uniform of a Howard sweatshirt and reading glasses pushed up on her head. I sat down. I opened the manila folder, and I told her everything. Gloria didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or exclaim or tell me she'd always known. She listened the way a professional listens, tracking the data, noting the patterns, building the structure in her mind. When I finished, she sat in her rocking chair for a long moment, the chair not rocking, perfectly still, and she looked at me with an expression that was the first genuine act of recognition I'd received in years. She said, "Rachel, you see it now." Not a question, a statement. She wasn't telling me what to think or feel. She was naming what had happened. I had spent 23 years seeing fraud in strangers and had finally turned the lens toward home, and what I saw was undeniable. "I see it," I said. "What are you going to do?" And I told her. I told her the plan that had been forming in the precision-oriented part of my brain since the morning I totaled the ledger. I told her every step, and with each step her eyes sharpened and her posture straightened, and by the end she was nodding. Not in agreement exactly, but in recognition. She recognized the methodology. She'd seen it applied to cases. She'd never seen it applied to a life. "You're going to need a lawyer," she said. "I have one. Martina Cole, estate and fraud specialist. You're going to need to keep your composure for at least 2 more months. I've been keeping my composure for 14 years. Gloria looked at me. She reached across the space between our chairs and put her hand on my forearm. Firm, warm, present. And she said something that landed in a place I didn't know was empty until it was filled. "You deserved better than this, Rachel. And you know what? You're going to be better than this." I put my hand over hers. We sat on that porch in the December chill, 2 women who made their livings finding the truth, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something that wasn't cold or numb or strategic. I felt held. Not by a partner or a child or a family that had never truly held me. Held by someone who saw me clearly and chose to stay. The masquerade began in January of 2024. For 2 months, I answered Delia's calls. I listened to my mother's updates. I sent my father a birthday card. I did everything I had always done, and none of them noticed any change because they had never been paying close enough attention to notice anything about me that didn't involve my wallet. I declined the $55,000 for Zuri's school assessment. I did it carefully. I said I was having a tough year financially, that some investments had underperformed, that I needed to pull back on large expenditures. Delia's response was illuminating. She didn't say she understood. She didn't express concern about my financial health. She went quiet for 3 days, and then she called back with a revised request. Could I do $25,000? It was the same ask, just smaller. The negotiation of a debt collector, not a sister. I said I'd think about it. This bought me 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, I was not thinking about it. I was working. First, the cosign. I met with Martina Cole, my lawyer, and we reviewed the mortgage documents I'd co-signed in 2013. Martina found what I'd suspected. The original loan application contained material misrepresentations about Delia and Marcus's income and employment history. In plain English, they'd lied on the application, and I'd been used as a creditworthy co-signer to legitimize a fraudulent filing. This gave me legal standing to petition for removal of my cosign obligation based on fraud. Martina began the paperwork. Second, the disability fraud. This was the lever that required the most careful handling. My father was committing a federal crime. Filing false disability claims isn't a family dispute. It's a felony. I knew this because I'd testified as an expert witness in cases exactly like his. The question wasn't whether what he was doing was illegal. The question was whether I was going to report it. I thought about this for weeks. I lay in bed at night in my house in Decatur and stared at the ceiling and asked myself what kind of person I was. What kind of daughter? What kind of investigator? I'd spent my entire career protecting the integrity of insurance and disability systems. I'd testified against strangers who did exactly what my father was doing. Could I exempt my own blood from the same standard I applied to everyone else? The answer when it came wasn't dramatic. It was simple. If I didn't report it, I was complicit. If I was complicit, then everything I'd built my professional life on was a lie. And I'd had enough lies. My family had given me a lifetime supply. I prepared an anonymous tip for the Office of the Inspector General. I documented everything Cheryl had found, the dates of the claims, the surveillance evidence of physical capability, the bank transfers showing where the money went. I prepared it with the same thoroughness I brought to every case file, and I set it aside. I wouldn't file it until the rest of the plan was ready. Everything had to happen in sequence. First, the legal withdrawal from the cosign, then the anonymous tip, then the confrontation with Delia, each action triggering the next, like dominoes arranged with professional precision. During these weeks of preparation, something almost broke the masquerade. My mother called me in mid-January and invited me to church. Not her usual church, a new one, a larger congregation in Lithonia where she'd been attending. She said she wanted me to come. She said the pastor had been asking about me. She said the congregation would love to meet Rachel. This was unusual. My mother had never invited me to church. She'd mentioned it in passing, the way you mention the weather, but she'd never asked. Something about the timing made the hair on my arms stand up. A new church, a sudden invitation. The same month I'd declined a financial request for the first time in 14 years. I went. I don't know why exactly. Maybe professional curiosity. Maybe the investigator's instinct to see what someone is hiding when they extend an unexpected invitation. The church was large, modern, with a praise band and stadium seating and screens that displayed Bible verses in animated text. My mother introduced me to several congregants with a warmth I hadn't felt from her in years. She held my arm. She smiled. She said, "This is my daughter Rachel, the one I told you about." After the service, a woman approached me. She was in her 60s, well-dressed, with kind eyes. She took my hand and said, "We've been praying for you, sweetheart. Your mother told us about your treatment. You're so brave." "My treatment?" "I'm sorry?" I said. "Your cancer treatment. Your mother's been asking us to keep you in our prayers. She even started a small donation fund. We all contribute when we can." My mother had been telling her church congregation that I had cancer. She had been collecting donations for my treatment, donations for a disease I did not have. I looked across the fellowship hall at my mother, who was laughing with another woman, holding a cup of punch, wearing her church hat and her church smile, and I understood with a clarity that felt like stepping out of a burning building into cold air that this woman had been running a con of her own. Parallel to Delia's, complementary to my father's, 3 separate fraud operations, each feeding on a different version of my suffering, each exploiting a different audience's sympathy. My mother's kindness that Sunday, the invitation, the arm-holding, the introduction, was a charm offensive. She was bringing me into the space where the con was running to reinforce the narrative. "Look, here's Rachel. She's so brave. She's here despite her treatment. See how strong she is?" And the donations would keep flowing. I drove home from that church service with my jaw clenched so tight I could feel the tension in my temples. I realized my jaw had been clenched around my family for 20 years. The muscle memory of holding back the words I should have said, swallowing the questions I should have asked, grinding my teeth around the truth I should have demanded. I called Gloria from my car. I told her about the church, the cancer story, the donation fund. Gloria was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "How many separate frauds is that now?" I counted. My father's disability fraud against the federal government, Delia's fabricated loan collateral scheme against other family members, my mother's fabricated cancer story against her church congregation, and the central, overarching fraud that all 3 fed into, the collective financial exploitation of Rachel Okonkwo, who had been recast as a bottomless resource to be managed, milked, and mocked behind her back. 4, I said. 4 separate frauds, all running simultaneously, all coordinated. Your family is an enterprise, Gloria said. And despite everything, despite the weight of it, I almost laughed. Because she was right. They were an enterprise, and I was about to conduct a hostile shutdown. The ticking clock arrived in February. Martina Cole called me to say the legal petition to withdraw my cosign was progressing, but the mortgage company required a formal hearing scheduled for March 15th. If Delia and Marcus couldn't demonstrate that they could maintain the mortgage without my credit backing, the lender would begin foreclosure proceedings. March 15th. I had a date. I coordinated the rest of the timeline around it. The anonymous tip to the OIG would be filed on March 1st, giving the federal investigation time to begin before Delia's financial world started shifting. The confrontation with Delia would happen after the cosign withdrawal was legally executed. I was building a sequence, and each step was documented, filed, and ready. But there was a moment in late February that almost derailed everything. A moment of doubt that I need to tell you about because if I don't, you'll think I'm colder than I am. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was at my kitchen table with the manila folder open, reviewing the timeline, and my phone rang. It was Delia. I answered because I was still in masquerade. "Rachel," she said, and her voice was different, soft, not the trembling leaf voice she uses when she wants money. A quieter softness. She said, "I was just going through some old pictures. I found one of us at Stone Mountain. Do you remember that? We were little. You were carrying me on your back because I said my legs were tired." I remembered. I was 10. She was 6. We'd gone on a family picnic, and halfway up the walk, Delia had complained that she couldn't go any farther, and I'd knelt down and let her climb on my back, and I'd carried her the rest of the way. My legs had burned. My father took a photo. "I remember," I said. "I miss that sometimes," Delia said. "I miss when things were simple, and something in my chest turned over. Not the cold, strategic thing that had been operating since Thanksgiving. Something older. Something that remembered carrying a little girl up a granite mountain and feeling her arms around my neck and hearing her laugh because she was so high up she could see everything. I almost told her. I almost said, 'Delia, I know. I know about the money and the loans and the Range Rover and Dad's disability and Mom's cancer story. I know everything. Can we just stop? Can we be the sisters who went to Stone Mountain?' But I didn't say it. Because in the pause after she mentioned the photo, while the warmth was still working on me, she added, 'Anyway, have you thought about the assessment money for Zuri? Even half would help.' And the warmth died. Instantly. Like a candle blown out. The phone call wasn't nostalgia. It was a strategy. Invoke the happy memory. Soften the target, then make the ask. I'd seen this technique in interview transcripts. Claimants who reminisce with investigators, build rapport, then slip in the justification. It has a name in fraud psychology. It's called grooming the asset. My sister was grooming me. "I'm still working on it," I said. "Give me a few more weeks." "Okay," she said. "Love you." "Love you too," I said. And I meant it, which is the most terrible part of all of this. I meant it. I still loved her. I still love her. Love and clarity are not mutually exclusive. You can love someone and still see them clearly. You can love someone and still refuse to be their resource. March came. The sequence began. On March 1st, I filed the anonymous tip with the Office of the Inspector General regarding my father's disability claims. The filing was detailed, evidence-supported, and professional. I included surveillance documentation, financial transfer records, and timeline analysis. I knew from professional experience that OIG investigations take time, but the wheels were now in motion. On March 15th, Martina Cole and I appeared at the mortgage company's hearing. I presented evidence that the original loan application contained material misrepresentations. The hearing officer reviewed the documentation. 2 weeks later, I received written confirmation. My cosign obligation was being released pending review, and the lender was initiating a reassessment of the loan terms. If Delia and Marcus couldn't qualify on their own, and we both knew they couldn't, the mortgage would go into default. I should tell you what I did the evening of March 15th. I went home. I sat in my sunroom. I held the manila folder, the same one from the coffee shop with Cheryl, now thicker with every piece of documentation from the past 4 months. I held it in my lap and looked at the late afternoon light coming through the windows, the golden Atlanta light that makes everything look like a painting. And I sat with the knowledge that what I had set in motion could not be undone. My father would be investigated. My sister would lose her house. My mother's church would learn the truth. The family I had supported for 14 years was about to experience the consequences of their own choices, and I was the one who had arranged those consequences with the same precision I brought to every case I'd ever worked. I asked myself, is this revenge? And the answer was no. Revenge is emotional. This was professional. This was what happens when a fraud is exposed. The fraud collapses. The structures built on lies lose their foundation. The people who built those structures experience gravity. I hadn't invented the gravity. I'd just stopped holding the building up. But I'm a human being, not a machine, and the truth is more complicated than that. There was satisfaction in it. I won't deny that. There was a cold, quiet satisfaction in knowing that the same skills my family had dismissed, the boring job, the dry career, the investigator's mind they'd never respected, were the very skills that had exposed them. They had underestimated me. They had looked at Rachel the piggy bank and never considered that the piggy bank might also be a vault, a ledger, and a lock. The confrontation didn't happen the way you might expect. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't arrange a family meeting. I didn't stage a dramatic reveal. I simply stopped. I stopped answering Delia's calls. The first one came on a Tuesday. I let it ring. The second came Wednesday. Voicemail. The third came Thursday, followed by a text. Rachel, everything okay? Call me back. I didn't call back. I stopped sending the small amounts that had become so routine they were almost automatic. The 100 here, the 200 there, the ongoing subscriptions I paid for that Delia had registered using my credit card, and I'd never challenged. I canceled them, one by one. The streaming services, the meal delivery, the salon membership. Each cancellation was a small surgical cut, and each one would eventually register as a disruption in Delia's daily life. I returned the Christmas gifts my mother sent. A package arrived at my door in early March, late, as my mother's gifts always were, wrapped in paper with a Nigerian print pattern. I didn't open it. I wrote "Return to Sender" on the label and left it for the mail carrier. Small gesture, enormous meaning in the language of family obligation. And I waited. The first call from Delia that signaled she understood something was wrong came on March 28th. Her voice wasn't soft this time. It was sharp. Rachel, what is going on? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Marcus said the mortgage company sent a letter. Something about the cosign? What is happening? I didn't answer the call. I listened to the voicemail in my car, in my driveway, engine off this time. The heat wasn't running. It was March in Atlanta, and the evening was mild, and I didn't need to be held by the warmth anymore. The second call came from my mother. Rachel Adeizio Okonkwo, you call me back right now. Your sister is upset. The mortgage people are saying something about your name being removed. What did you do? What did you do? Not what happened. What did you do? The accusation embedded in the question. The assumption that any disruption in Delia's life was my fault and my responsibility. Even now, even in the crisis, I was the one who had done something wrong by refusing to be exploited. I didn't call back. The third call came from my father. He rarely called. His voice was measured, careful. Rachel, this is your father. I don't know what's going on between you and your sister, but family handles things in family. Call me. Family handles things in family. The code of silence that protects every collective fraud. The closed circuit that prevents outside accountability. I knew this language. I'd heard it from 100 claimants' families when the investigation closed in. I didn't call back. And then, 3 weeks into my silence, on a Saturday morning in mid-April, Delia showed up at my house. I heard the car pull up, the Range Rover. I was in my kitchen making coffee. My morning ritual, the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, the quiet hour. I heard the door of the Range Rover slam with the specific heavy thud of a luxury vehicle. I heard her heels on my walkway. And I heard the doorbell, followed by knocking, followed by more knocking. I opened the door. Delia stood on my porch in designer sunglasses pushed up on her head and a fitted jacket, and an expression that was trying to be righteous but was undermined by something I'd never seen on her face before. Fear. "What is going on with you?" she said. Not a greeting, not a question, a demand. "Come in," I said. And my voice was even. Not cold, not warm. Even. The voice I use in interviews when I'm about to present findings. She came in. She stood in my living room, arms crossed, looking around as if she was assessing the value of my furniture, which, knowing what I now knew, she probably was. "Rachel, the mortgage company says your cosign is being withdrawn. Do you know what that means? We could lose the house. Our house." "Your house," I said. "That I cosigned for." "Same thing." "It's not the same thing." "Fine. Okay. The house we live in that you helped us get. What happened?" And here is where the confrontation that I'd been building toward for 4 months found its shape. I walked to the desk in my living room. I picked up the manila folder. The same folder. Thicker now. Dog-eared at the edges. The folder that started as a professional tool and had become a detonator. I handed it to Delia. "What's this?" she said. "Open it." She opened it, and I watched her face as she turned the pages. I watched her see the ledger. $297,412, itemized by date and amount, and stated purpose and actual purpose. I watched her eyes move down the column, and I watched the moment she realized that every dollar was accounted for, every lie was documented, every fabricated emergency was laid bare in black and white. She looked up. "Rachel, Keep going," I said. She turned to the next section. The doula program, side by side, the receipt from the supposed program that never existed, and the vehicle registration for the Range Rover, dated within 2 weeks of my transfer. Same amount, $28,000. "That's not," she started. "Keep going." The cosign documentation. The original loan application with the income figures highlighted that didn't match any verifiable employment records. The misrepresentations that gave me legal standing to withdraw. Her face was changing. The fear was still there, but something else was arriving. The realization that this wasn't a conversation. This was a case file. She was looking at a case file, and she was the subject. "I investigated you, Delia," I said. I said it quietly. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because the truth doesn't need volume. It needs precision. The way I investigate anyone who commits fraud. And you failed. "You investigated me?" Her voice pitched upward, not in guilt, in outrage. "I'm your sister." "You're my sister who told other family members to loan you money using my name as collateral." Page 7. She turned to page 7. I watched her read the text messages. Her own text messages to Aunt Ifeoma in Houston, copied from Cheryl's documentation. "Rachel said she'll cover it if I can't pay you back. You know Rachel. She's got more money than she knows what to do with." I didn't mean, You're my sister who took $28,000 I gave you for a career and bought a car. Marcus's connection at the dealership. It was a deal. There was no doula program. There was never a doula program. You invented it because you knew I'd fund your education but not your luxury vehicle. Her mouth opened and closed. I'd seen this in interviews. The moment when the subject's rehearsed narratives fail, and they can't generate new ones fast enough. The gap between the last lie and the next one. That gap is where the truth lives. And you're my sister who told her 7-year-old daughter that the reason God took my ability to have children was so I'd have more money to give you. That one landed differently. Delia's arms uncrossed. She took a half step backward. The fear in her eyes wasn't about the house anymore. It was about being seen. Fully, completely seen by someone she'd spent years convincing herself was too blinded by love and loyalty to ever look clearly. Zuri just, kids say things. Kids repeat things. Zuri repeated what you said. She repeated it at Thanksgiving, in front of the entire family, and no one at that table had the decency to be ashamed. Not you. Not Mom. Not Dad. Because you'd all decided that my tragedy was your financial opportunity. The room was silent. Not the silence of a pause in conversation. The silence of a structure failing. The silence of a foundation cracking and the walls not yet knowing they're supposed to fall. I want you to understand something, I said. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because I finally looked at my own family the way I look at every case that comes across my desk. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the patterns. I looked at the timing of the requests and the absence of contact between them. I looked at the group chat I was excluded from. I looked at the relatives who were told I owed the family for surviving childhood. I looked at Mom's church learning I have cancer when I don't have cancer. I looked at all of it, Delia. And what I found was a fraud. A coordinated, sustained, family-wide fraud with me as the target. Delia's hands were shaking. She set the manila folder on my coffee table. She looked at it like it might bite her. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "I've already done it. The cosign withdrawal is in process. Your mortgage will be reassessed. You and Marcus will need to qualify on your own, which, based on the financial disclosures in the original application, I suspect you can't. I've stopped all financial transfers. Every subscription, every recurring payment, every account linked to my credit. It's done. You'll destroy us. No, I'll stop subsidizing you. What happens after that is the consequence of how you built your life. You built it on my credit, my income, and my pain. I'm reclaiming all three." Delia stood in my living room and did something I hadn't anticipated. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She went on the attack. "You're doing this because you're bitter," she said. "You're doing this because you can't have kids and you resent me for having Zuri. You've always resented me. Mom was right. You're cold. You've always been cold. That's why Terrence left. That's why you're alone. You think your money makes you better than us, but it just makes you a lonely woman with a file cabinet for a heart. I should tell you that those words hurt. They were designed to hurt, and they hit their mark. The reference to Terrence, the reference to my childlessness, the word lonely, deployed like a weapon against the most vulnerable part of my self-image. Delia knew where to cut because she'd had a lifetime to map my wounds. But here's the thing about being an investigator. You learn that people under pressure reveal their true strategy. When a subject is cornered, they default to their most practiced manipulation technique. And Delia's most practiced technique was using my pain against me. She'd been doing it for years. The calls that came when I was grieving. The requests framed as opportunities for me to feel useful. The narrative that my giving was therapeutic. Poor Rachel, filling her empty life with generosity. This time, I saw it. Not in retrospect, not through documentation. I saw it in real time as it happened, the way I see fraud in real time during interviews. And the recognition immunized me. "I think you should leave," I said. "Rachel, take the folder. It's a copy. I have others." She didn't take the folder. She walked out of my house and got into the Range Rover and drove away. I stood at the window and watched the car turn the corner, and I'm going to be honest about what I felt. I felt the specific exhaustion of a woman who has just performed the most difficult professional action of her career, except the subject wasn't a stranger in a conference room. The subject was the girl I carried up Stone Mountain. I sat down. I put my hand on the manila folder on the coffee table. The paper was warm from where Delia's hands had held it. I pressed my palm flat against it and I breathed. If you're still listening to this story right now, I need you to know something. I'm not telling you this because I want you to take my side. I'm telling you this because somewhere, right now, someone is doing the math I did. Someone is adding up the amounts. Someone is looking at the pattern of calls and the timing of requests and the silence between them. And that someone is asking themselves the same question I asked. Am I family or am I a funding source? If your family only calls when they need something, if they know your credit score but not your favorite song, if they celebrate your generosity publicly but mock your loneliness privately, if they know about your losses only insofar as those losses make you more available to them, then you're not family. You're a resource being managed. And I'm telling you, from the other side of the hardest decision I've ever made, you have the right to stop. You have the right to close the account. You have the right to investigate your own life with the same rigor you bring to your work. And if what you find is fraud, you have the right to treat it as such. Okay. Back to what happened next. The weeks after the confrontation were a cascade. Each consequence triggered the next, and each one arrived with a specificity that made it impossible to dismiss. The cosign withdrawal was finalized on April 22nd. Martina Cole called me with the confirmation. The mortgage company had completed its reassessment. Delia and Marcus's income could not support the loan without my credit profile. They were given 30 days to find alternative financing or the property would enter default proceedings. Delia called me 14 times in the week after that notice arrived. I didn't answer. She texted me a progression that I could have scripted from my professional experience. Day 1. This is insane. Call me right now. Day 3. Rachel, please. We can talk about this. I know things got heated. Day 5. I don't understand why you're punishing Zuri for something between us. She loves that house. Her room is purple. She picked the color herself. Day 7. Just tell me what you want. I'll do whatever you want. Just stop this. Day 10. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Please just call me. The use of Zuri was strategic, and it was the one that tested me. Invoking a child's purple bedroom, making me the villain who was taking a little girl's home away. But I held to the truth I'd learned. The purple bedroom was in a house secured through fraud. The mortgage payments were subsidized by disability checks that were themselves fraudulent. Zuri's home was built on lies, and the person who built it on lies was not the person withdrawing a cosign. It was the person who lied on the application. In May, the OIG investigation reached my father. I know this because Gloria told me. She had contacts in the federal system, and the investigation was moving faster than usual because the evidence was comprehensive and the case was straightforward. A federal agent knocked on my father's door on a Wednesday morning. My father, who had been claiming debilitating lumbar injury for 12 years, answered the door without a cane, without a walker, standing fully upright. The investigation would take months to fully resolve, but the immediate consequence was the suspension of his disability payments pending review. Over $2,000 a month, gone. Which meant Delia's monthly supplement from our father, the money that had been flowing for over a decade, also stopped. And then my mother's church. I want to be clear. I did not contact my mother's church. I did not send them documentation. I did not expose her directly. What happened was organic, the way truth tends to propagate when enough pressure is applied to the system containing it. One of the church members, a woman named Patricia, who ran the women's ministry, happened to be a patient at the same medical practice as me. During a routine visit, Patricia mentioned to her own doctor that she'd been praying for a fellow congregant's daughter who was undergoing cancer treatment. The doctor's nurse, who also happened to process insurance correspondence for patients in the practice, mentioned in casual conversation that she'd never seen any oncology referrals for anyone named Okonkwo. Patricia found this odd. She mentioned it to another church member. That church member asked my mother a direct question. My mother's answer was unconvincing. A second question was asked. A third. Within 2 weeks, the women's ministry had conducted its own investigation. Nothing formal, just the human network of concern and suspicion that communities are capable of. And the truth emerged. There was no cancer. There was no treatment. There were donations collected for a medical crisis that didn't exist. The church didn't make a public announcement. They didn't need to. The information spread the way information spreads in close communities, through changed behavior. People who used to greet my mother warmly began offering polite nods instead. The women's ministry chair stopped returning her calls. The pastor had a private conversation with her that I wasn't privy to, but that resulted in my mother leaving that congregation entirely. The donation fund was dismantled, and the money, approximately $6,000, was redirected to the church's general benevolence fund. My mother called me once during this period. I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say. "Rachel," she said. And her voice was the voice of a woman who has been stripped of her social infrastructure. Not remorseful, bewildered, as if the universe had malfunctioned. "People at church are saying terrible things. They're saying I lied about your health. Where would they get such an idea?" "From the truth," I said. "You told them?" "I didn't tell anyone. The truth found its own way out. It always does. Your father is having problems with his disability checks. Something about a review. He's very stressed. And your sister says the house—" "Mom, I know about the donations you collected. I know you told your church I have cancer. I know you told the family in Nigeria that I owe you for raising me. I know about Dad's disability claims. I know about Delia's loans in my name. I know about all of it." Silence. Not the silence of shock. The silence of recalculation. I could almost hear the machinery working. Which story to deploy, which emotion to perform, which version of reality to construct that might still give her leverage. "You always were difficult," she said finally. And she hung up. That was the last conversation I had with my mother for 5 months. In the months that followed, I watched from a distance as the architecture of my family's lifestyle collapsed. Not with pleasure exactly. More with the grim recognition of someone watching a condemned building come down, knowing it had to fall, knowing it was unsafe, but still remembering what it looked like when you thought it was sound. Delia and Marcus couldn't secure alternative financing. The Buckhead house went into foreclosure proceedings in June. I know because Martina Cole tracked the public filings. They moved into an apartment in Morrow, a significant step down from Buckhead, a significant recalibration of the lifestyle that my cosign had made possible. The Range Rover was repossessed in July. The financing that Delia had taken out using my $28,000 as a down payment required monthly payments she could no longer make without the disability money flowing from our father. The car was taken from her driveway, and I know this because Marcus posted on social media about haters and the system being rigged, which Gloria showed me on her phone while we sat on her porch in Kirkwood, rocking in the estate sale chairs, drinking sweet tea. My father's disability case moved through the federal system with the glacial but inexorable pace of government proceedings. He was required to undergo an independent medical examination, which found no evidence of the debilitating lumbar condition he'd claimed. His benefits were terminated. A recovery action was initiated for overpayments. The total amount the federal government would seek to recover, approximately $316,000. Whether criminal charges would follow was still pending, but the financial consequences were immediate and devastating. And through all of it, The attempts to reach me continued, not just from my immediate family, from extended family too. Aunt Ifeoma in Houston called to say she'd heard there was trouble and couldn't I just forgive and move forward. Uncle Amika in London sent a WhatsApp message saying blood is thicker than water. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a Facebook message that was clearly drafted by my mother, using phrases my mother uses and references only my mother would make. I didn't respond to any of them, not out of cruelty. Out of the understanding that each of these contacts was a probe, a test to see if the old Rachel, the accommodating Rachel, the piggybank Rachel, could be reactivated. And she couldn't. She was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the difference between family and fraud, between love and exploitation, between generosity and self-erasure. Gloria was my anchor during these months. We had dinner together on Wednesdays. She'd cook. Gloria makes a jollof rice that rivals my mother's, which is saying something. And she never tells me her recipe because she says a woman needs her secrets. We'd sit at her dining room table with the food and the wine, and sometimes files from our respective cases. And we'd talk about work and life, and the strange parallel between catching strangers' lies and catching your own family's. One Wednesday in August, after dinner, we were sitting on the porch. The cicadas were screaming in the trees the way they do in Atlanta summers, a wall of sound that makes silence impossible and yet somehow creates its own kind of quiet. Gloria was rocking in her chair. I was holding my wine glass and watching a firefly blink in the yard. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. Really thought. Not the reflexive fine that I'd trained myself to produce. An honest assessment. "Lighter?" I said, like something physical was removed, like I'd been carrying actual weight in my body and it's gone. "Good," she said, and she clinked her glass against mine, and the firefly blinked again, and we sat in the warm dark, and I felt something that I can only describe as the first true piece of my adult life. The manila folder went through its final transformation in September. I'd been thinking about it for months, not the folder itself, but what it represented. It had started as a professional tool, a standard manila folder, the kind I'd used to dismantle hundreds of strangers' fraud schemes. Then it became the weapon I used to dismantle my own family's fraud. It had been the container for the worst truths of my life. It had sat on my coffee table, warm from my sister's terrified hands. It had been copied, referenced, updated, and carried in my bag like a talisman. And now I didn't need it anymore. I took the original folder, not the copies, which were with Martina Cole and in my own secure files, and I fed it through the shredder in my home office. I watched the blades turn it into ribbons. The bank statements, the text messages, the receipts, the surveillance documentation. All of it reduced to thin strips of paper that curled and fell into the bin like confetti at the end of something. I took the shredded paper to a recycling center in Decatur. Not because I'm particularly eco-conscious, though I try. Because I had learned, during my research into what to do with the shredded remains, that recycled paper gets remade. It gets pulped and pressed and turned into new paper. And I had a specific use in mind for that idea. The adoption paperwork arrived 2 weeks later. Blank forms printed on fresh white paper, ready to be filled with a future instead of a past. I don't know if any molecule of the manila folder found its way into those forms. It doesn't matter. What matters is the transformation. The same substance that held the documentation of my exploitation was now, in whatever form, part of the substrate for my new beginning. I need to tell you about Elijah. Elijah is 6 years old. He's in the foster care system in DeKalb County. He has big eyes and a gap-toothed grin and a way of tilting his head when he's thinking. That reminds me of how I used to sit at my desk with case files, head cocked, considering the evidence. He draws pictures of houses with too many windows, which his caseworker says is a sign of wanting to see everything around him, wanting to feel safe by seeing what's coming. I haven't met him yet as I'm telling you this story. I've seen his photo. I've read his file. I've begun the home study process, which is extensive and intrusive and requires me to open every door of my life to scrutiny, which, after what I've been through, feels almost refreshing. Scrutinize me. Look at everything. I have nothing to hide. I am 51 years old, and I'm going to be a mother. Not in the way I'd planned at 34, before the surgery, before the loss, before the decade and a half of filling the void with family obligations that were really family exploitation. Not in the way Delia mocked when she told her daughter that God took my fertility so I'd have more money to give. In a way that I chose, deliberately, with open eyes and full documentation, and a home that's paid for, and a savings account that I've been rebuilding since I stopped subsidizing my family's lifestyle. The money I've saved since January? Without the drain of Delia's requests, my father's fabricated needs, my mother's manufactured crises? In 9 months, I've accumulated more personal savings than I had in the previous 5 years. The math is devastating. The math is liberation. It's October now, a Saturday morning. I'm sitting in my sunroom in Decatur, the one with the hardwood floors that creak in the hallway, and the morning light that comes in so clean. There's a mug of Ethiopian yirgacheffe on the table beside me, steam curling up past the window where I can see my neighbor's magnolia tree. Patient as always. On the table in front of me, spread across the surface where I used to review case files at 5 a.m., are the adoption papers, partially filled out. Elijah's photo clipped to the top page, a 6-year-old boy who needs a home, and a 51-year-old woman who has one to give. This is the first time in decades I'm spending money on my own future. And the feeling is one I don't have a case file for. I don't have a professional framework. I only have the sensation of morning light on my hands and paper under my fingers, and the knowledge that this paper is building something new instead of documenting something broken. Let me tell you where things stand with my family, because the picture isn't complete without it. My father is navigating the federal recovery process for overpaid disability benefits. He and my mother have downsized from the house in College Park to a smaller rental in Union City. His attorney is negotiating a repayment plan. I don't know the details, and I don't seek them out. What I know is that the fraud that funded my sister's lifestyle for 12 years has been stopped, and the system that my career exists to protect is functioning as it should. Delia and Marcus are in the apartment in Morrow. The foreclosure on the Buckhead house was finalized in August. Delia works part-time at a medical office, a real job, possibly the first she's held consistently since I've known her as an adult. Marcus still works, as he always did, though without the supplemental income from my cosign and my father's disability checks, their lifestyle has contracted to match their actual means. Zuri is enrolled in public school. I think about her sometimes. Her braids and her honest mouth and her purple bedroom that doesn't exist anymore. I hope she's okay. I believe she will be. Children are resilient in ways that adults who exploit them don't deserve. Delia sent me a letter in September. Handwritten. I opened it because the handwriting on the envelope was Zuri's. She'd written Auntie Rachel in her careful second-grade script, with a heart over the I. Inside was Delia's letter. It was 3 pages long. It was an apology of sorts, the kind of apology that's also an explanation, and also a justification, and also, at the very end, a request. She's sorry for how things went. She never meant to hurt me. She didn't realize how much I was doing. And could I consider co-signing on a smaller place, just a rental, not a purchase? I didn't respond. Not because I don't feel anything. I feel a great deal. But I've learned the difference between feeling and acting on feeling. I've learned that compassion and complicity are not the same thing. I've learned that you can love someone from a distance that keeps you both honest. My mother has not contacted me since the phone call, where she called me difficult. I hear through the family grapevine, which functions whether you participate in it or not, that she's attending a different church, that she's quieter than she used to be, that people who knew about the donation fund have been less warm, And people who didn't know have started asking questions about why the women's ministry chair changed. I don't feel triumph about any of this. What I feel is something more complicated and more durable than triumph. I feel the specific relief of a person who was carrying a weight they'd convinced themselves was love, and finally set it down and realized it was never love at all. It was obligation dressed up as affection. It was exploitation wrapped in tradition. It was a con that ran for 14 years because the investigator was also the mark, and the mark was too invested in the cover story to question it. There's something I want to share with you before I go. Something I learned in the course of dismantling my own family's fraud that I think matters beyond my story. There's a psychological term for what happened to me. It's called financial enmeshment, and it's more common than people think. Research from the American Psychological Association indicates that approximately 37% of adults who provide regular financial support to family members report feeling trapped in the role, unable to reduce or stop giving without experiencing guilt, manipulation, or family rupture. 37%. That's more than a third of every person who sends money home, who co-signs a loan for a relative, who pays for a family member's wedding or education or medical bills. More than a third feel trapped. And the National Endowment for Financial Education reports that 65% of people who have experienced financial abuse by a family member did not recognize it as abuse while it was happening. They recognized it as obligation, as love, as what family does. I was in both of those statistics. I was the 37%, and I was the 65%, for 14 years. If you recognize yourself in any part of this story, if your phone rings and your first thought is, how much, not how are you? If you track your family's income cycles better than they track yours because you know when the calls are coming, if you've been told that your success exists to serve someone else's needs, then I want you to know that recognizing the pattern is not betrayal. It's not selfishness. It's not the cold, difficult thing your family might call it when you finally draw the line. It's investigation. And when the investigation is complete, you're allowed to close the case. I'm sitting in my sunroom. The light is shifting as the morning ages, moving across the table, warming the adoption papers. Elijah's photo catches the sun, and his eyes seem to brighten. The magnolia tree outside is shedding its last summer leaves, making room for whatever comes next. I pick up my pen. I start filling in the forms. My name, my address, my income, my actual income. All of it mine, none of it siphoned. The box that asks about household size, currently 1. Soon, God willing, 2. The pen is steady. My hands are warm. I'd love to know where you're listening to this from. Your car? Your kitchen? The office where you work a job that someone in your family has never asked you about? Drop a comment. Tell me where you are, and tell me, honestly, what you would have done. Would you have opened the folder? Would you have handed it to your sister? Would you have filed the tip? Or would you still be in that driveway on Thanksgiving, engine running, heat blasting, whispering the truth to yourself and hoping that this time, someone else would hear it first? If this story reached you, if it found the part of you that's been keeping a ledger you haven't totaled yet, then hit that like button. Subscribe. Because there are more stories like mine. There are more people who carried families on their backs up granite mountains and were never thanked for it. And those people are starting to set the weight down. I'm Rachel. I'm 51. I live in Decatur, Georgia, in a house I own with money I earned. And for the first time in my life, every dollar I spend is an investment in my own future. The pen moves across the page. The coffee goes cold because I'm absorbed. The magnolia tree stands patient outside my window. And the sunroom is full of light.